Hello, hello. How are you guys? Welcome back to a new episode of Dare to Be Fearless. So, I changed the name of the podcast because, as a personal branding expert, get myself on everything from the Today Show to Good Morning America.
Wednesday, I moderated a panel in London.
I'm always super prepared. So, essentially, the segment is done for them.
What should influencers do to get attention from you? What are your tips for influencers who are just starting out?
I may have something that'll make your life a lot easier.
So, I decided to change the name of the new Unfiltered to Dare to Be Fearless because my whole mission is obviously surrounding being fearless. I'm wearing this necklace to be fearless, and I'm wearing a bracelet that says fearless. As you can tell, this is my whole thing. So this is the new version of the new Unfiltered. Same content, same stuff, same me, but just a different name. So thanks for sticking along. So in this episode, I wanted to talk about something very specific and very niche. I thought that this may help some of you who are going back to school as well as struggling with body image. And this is actually my experience getting a breast reduction. I haven't ever really spoken about this or my health journey on any of my platforms because I try to keep it very above board with entrepreneurship and general things about confidence. But I actually realize now, as I've gotten older and now that I'm 26, how much that surgery has impacted my life. I also just finished paying off the loan for it, which reminded me how far I've come. And so those of you who not only struggle with your confidence, but perhaps have struggled with this particular problem or insecurity, this episode is definitely for you. So I will start from the beginning of this journey for me getting the breast reduction, and then I will go into more specific things like insurance, whether or not it covered mine, the actual surgery, and the process behind it. And hopefully this helps many of you who have struggled with this particular thing. And just to clarify, a breast augmentation is very different than a reduction. A lot of women go into having breast augmentations, which means that your boobs get bigger. A breast reduction is your boobs are getting smaller, and they are getting significantly smaller. It is a very intense procedure, and I don't think it's spoken enough about. And especially if you are like me and you're taller, you have a bit of a maybe slimmer build. And so I don't think I was necessarily the most expected person to go and get a breast reduction. But if you looked at my body, and I'll put some pictures throughout this episode of what I looked like, I think it will make a lot of sense, even though I spent years trying to cover my upper body because of this. So around age, I would say 14 or 15, I noticed that I was and had gone through a significant growth spurt. So in, I think, the 8th grade, I went from being like 5'4" to 5'8". I got really tall. It definitely enabled me to be bullied, I think, a lot more than other kids, because all of a sudden I went from looking like a totally different person almost overnight. And so at that time, I was super insecure. I really, really struggled with my confidence. I think a lot of people ask me now, like, how did you become so confident? And what I think people forget is you're seeing this version of me now after years of doing this. If you've just found my podcast, if you've just found my content, if you've just subscribed to my newsletter, this is the version you're seeing of me now. But if you knew me when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, starting the blog at 12, 14, 15, 16, I was a totally different person. And I was even a very different person up until age 23, 24. I believe heavily that people go through different phases of their life. And I will say definitely the period of time between 18 to 20, 20 to 22, 22 to 24, and then 25 to 27 are just instrumental in shaping you as a person. So as you navigate these waters of body image and confidence and insecurities and your relationships, just remember that it's very much going in stages here. But so when I went through that growth spur, I felt definitely more insecure about my body. Then I got into my blog and my career. And so for a period of time, I was doing a ton of different TV segments. I think it's really quite interesting, my journey, because when other people were getting their first job, the way that I figured out how to make money to pursue my blog at the time was these TV segments, which stemmed out of somebody I had interned for in New York, and she would do these branded TV segments. So at age 16 or 17, and if you Google me, like Alexa Curtis on Fox or Alexa Curtis on whatever morning show, you'll see that I would be in random cities across the country and I would do these branded sponsored segments. So I would pitch a segment to Fox Boston or Fox Detroit, and they would have me on the show, and then I would go to a brand that I would pitch and say, pay me $1,000 to talk about back to school fashion for Kohl's on whatever Fox station, just a random brand. And so that was how I was paying my bills at the time. And so because of that, I became very conscious of what I looked like on camera. I definitely noticed that my breasts were very large. So to give you a frame of reference, I was a 34 triple D. The surgery was able to get me down to a 34C, but there's a massive difference of sizes in between a C and a triple D. And so that's what the surgery was really able to accomplish for me, was to get me down to a C, but I was a 34 triple D. Now I had a bilateral breast reduction, so my breasts were very low, like almost on my ribs. And so the surgery, it was a unique one because you can get a proper breast reduction, which is just, the fat cells essentially removed from your breast, or you can get a bilateral one, which for me was what I needed, which was a lift and a reduction. Now, this is not a fun surgery. When I say a breast lift or like anything to do with your boobs, like this is not a fun cosmetic surgery to get done. This made a massive impact in my life. It affected me and my health for a really long time. So this was something that I needed to do for me in ways that perhaps are different than somebody who's getting an augmentation. Your breasts are smaller, you want them to be larger for cosmetic reasons. For me, it was predominantly cosmetic, but also for health reasons because of the back pain and whatnot that I was experiencing. So when I first decided to get this done, at the time there was very little research around this. People were getting it, but it wasn't as common. Think TikTok wasn't around, Instagram was around, but when you're 17 years old, 16 years old, this isn't the most common thing that you're searching up online. So I saw it somewhere and it stemmed me to start researching breast reductions. I had no idea that that was a possibility, that I could get my breast size reduced to make me feel more confident. And so the research that I started to do enabled me to find out that this was a very common procedure. It was a scary one and it was an expensive one, but that very few people had adverse side effects or regrets about doing it. And so the process for me to decide to do it was, number one, realize that if I were to lose weight, it wasn't going away from my boobs. The conversations I had through my early teen years with my mom were really difficult for me because she was always very strict on me about my body image. When I went through that growth spur and the lack of resources that were out there for me to understand my body at the time and to understand how to be confident when you're dealing with those particular topics, and especially body image for young women is such a sensitive topic, to have your mom be really harsh on you about your body was not easy for me. And I love my mom and we have a great relationship, but as I said in a prior episode of this podcast, moms have a very strong tendency to project onto their daughters. And I think my mom was very nervous for me that there was a lot of fluctuating weight moments between my early teen years. So when I came to the realization that me losing a lot of weight, because I had an eating disorder, so I knew the ups and downs of not eating and binging and whatnot, it was never going away from my breasts, is when I was able to make a conscious decision that I wanted to look more into this surgery. So the first thing that I did was I downloaded an app called Real Self. If you're thinking about getting this surgery, you need to download this app. This app changed my life. It has every doctor on there, every single review. I was living in Boston at the time, so what I did was I looked up doctors in the Boston area and I went through all of their reviews, and I didn't actually present this idea to my mom until I had decided I really wanted to get this done. So my childhood best friend and I at the time would take my mom's car. She'd be like, "Where are you going?" And we'd be like, "West Hartford or Manchester," which is 40 minutes from where I'm from, 30 minutes from where I'm from, more metropolitan shopping areas in comparison to this rural farm town that I was from. And then we'd get back at like 7 or 8 p.m. And my mom would be like, "Where did you guys go?" And she's adorable, but she's so naive. And I'd be like, "West Hartford for shopping, for back to school shopping." And she'd be like, "Okay," as there's, 400 new miles on the car. We would go to New York. We would go to Darien, Connecticut. We went to Massachusetts. And so for about 3 months, I set up multiple different free consultations with of doctors, and I had them obviously examine my breasts. It's a free consultation. You can set it up with them. There is no virtual consultation for this type of a surgery, nor would I ever suggest that you go to a virtual consultation. If that's an option for you, don't do that. Definitely go in person. And so I met with about 3 different doctors, and I was getting estimates for that surgery. Now, at the time, I was told by the first doctor I had seen, which I think was in Darien, Connecticut, which is about close to 2 hours from where I'm from, that there was a possibility my insurance would cover this surgery. Now, at the time, I was very broke. I really didn't have much money. So there was no thought in my mind that I was going to be able to pay out of pocket for this. I knew I was going to have to figure out a way to get the money. So I thought at first, let me see if my insurance will cover it. What I didn't realize going through that process is your insurance will not cover your breast reduction unless it is either one, a certain size. Mine were too small, as big as they were, for me to get my insurance to cover it off the bat. I think there are cases where your insurance, depending on the insurance you have, and at the time I was on my mom, who was a nurse, I was on her insurance plan, and so I think it was Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so it was a good insurance plan, but there was insurances out there, I want to say Aetna, but you guys would have to double check this, that have really great success rates for allowing people to get their breast reduction covered by birth control. But mine were not big enough. So the first consultation I did, I went in, I saw the doctor, he took photos. Then they have to send the photos to the insurance company, who then get back to you within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and say whether you're able to get the surgery done and get it covered. So there was that option, which we tried to do. And then the other option is to pay for it outright, which cost about $12,500 was what mine costs. Now, with the insurance, you can get it that size if you're a certain size, which I think you have to be maybe a G, is I think their base minimum. And now there are women out there who are very petite and have massively large breasts, right? Like, I encourage you to be aware that if you are someone who struggles with your upper body, it doesn't mean you're overweight. It doesn't mean you're really fat. It means that for whatever reason, and a lot of it is genetics, I've done a ton of research prior and during that procedure and that time frame for me to try and understand this, that a lot of it is genetics. My grandmother had really large breasts. My mom was always very slim and really didn't, and my sister didn't. So it was very difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that my body was the way that it was when my sister was rail thin and my mom barely even needed a bra, and then I couldn't even fit in a bra. So the other option for you is to go through months of physical therapy. I also looked into that because, of course, at the time I was willing to do anything to not have to pay that amount of money. I had no idea how I was going to get that amount of money. But the thing about physical therapy is, number one, it's also not covered by your insurance. So if you're going through the process of wanting to get it covered by your insurance, your insurance may not cover it. It's also considered quite cosmetic parts of physical therapy for something like having to prove that you have back pain, which is really the go-to for breast reductions. Most women deal with back pain or scoliosis. And so when I looked up the estimate for how much it would cost me to go through physical therapy, I realized that it would take close to 6 months and I think close to $6,000 or $7,000 for me to do that. By the time that would have been, I would have been, I think, closer to 18. It would have been in the summer. I was really keen to get this done in December. I had these first early consultations in early August through September, which is when I made the decision and put the deposit down and found the proper doctor. And the reason I was very keen to go about doing it over the holidays was because when I found my doctor, and I'll explain how I met Dr. Lee after this quick mention, was I was made very aware that the recovery time for this surgery is intense. The reviews that I read on Real Self really said that people were out for weeks. And so I was very scared. I'm very type A, I'm very neurotic, and at the time, financially, I had very little, but I was living on my own, and so I was very scared about not being able to work, and it was the best decision that I made. So I went through those first early on consultations. I realized that my insurance was not going to cover it. And so I came to the realization that that's when I wanted to acknowledge to my mom that I had seen the surgery and I wanted to get it done. And so I did. I presented to her the reasoning behind why I wanted to get this procedure, the research that I had done. And my mom, when it comes to things like health and when it comes to things like career, has always been super supportive. Things like boys and dating, she does not. She definitely has her own opinion on. But when it comes to health things, she's very always in my corner. Same with school. She was always super in my corner about going to online school. And so when I told her, I remember from the beginning, she was like, I think it's a great idea. I also noticed that you have very large breasts. I noticed that even if you're working out more or whatnot, that it's not necessarily changing that size. And so she said, let's do this. Like, let's figure out a way to make this happen. And I remember feeling such a sigh of relief. There's nothing like going to your mom, who obviously you want to agree with and approve of everything you're doing at that tender young age, and not knowing what she's going to say. But she was super on board. And so I had told her that those days, those long days where we were shopping for back to school pens, were actually spent at different doctors with consultations I had looked into. And that's when my mom was like, let's actually ask your uncle. So I have an uncle who's in the pharmaceutical industry in Texas. And so my dad called him up and said, I was looking to get this procedure done, and did he have any suggestions? This is such an awkward thing to have your dad know about. I remember it made me super uncomfortable. This is not like getting a tattoo. This is your boobs being touched, and it's freaky. I also had a boyfriend at the time, like my first high school boyfriend. And so I remember he was super concerned about it. And of course, right, like most guys, obviously a woman's breasts are the biggest, most appealing thing about a chick. Like, are you a butt guy? Are you a boob guy? Whatever. And so I remember every time I told someone, or we'd even tell a guy friend, they would be like, how would you want to make your boobs smaller? They're great. And that's when you become, I think, more confident at a younger age. And I think that's why I've been able to accomplish so much in my career, is because I participated in experiences like this, right? That most people at that age don't go through. And so it made me very well aware of how to participate in certain conversations and harder topics, how to tell people certain things about yourself. But it's not about that. Like, for a guy to say, you have great boobs, you have no idea what it's like to live every day with 34 triple D. And the first thing that someone looks at is your boobs. And especially for me, when I'm on TV, the last thing I wanted was the emails and the messages I would get from someone acknowledging how I look when I was there to do a job, and I didn't want to wear these ugly sweaters or dresses anymore solely because I was so insecure. So it took me years to get to that point of realizing I wanted to make a change to myself. And I encourage you, if you are thinking about doing this, make sure it's the right decision. You should feel that form of insecurity or whatnot about your body for quite a while. I think there's something really safe about making a conscious decision to do something not in the heat of the moment, because it's a process, because you want to take your time with it. So my uncle actually referred me to a doctor named Dr. Lee in Massachusetts. He was a doctor that was very well known in the breast reduction surgery sphere. I immediately set a consultation with him. I went down, I think, with my mom, or I went down maybe with that same friend at the time. And these doctors are not your friends. They're like lawyers. When you go to get a plastic surgery, this is not like what you see on the news in LA or like what you're watching on Botched. These doctors are there to do a job. They're there to examine this part of your body and decide whether or not they can help you with it. And he did. He looked at mine, and I remember he said, what would be your dream size? And I said to him, I really want to not have any breasts. I've always been really insecure about it. And he said to me, based on your size, your 34 triple D, he said, I think the lowest we can get you down to is a C. That is surgically allowed. And I said, okay. And so he asked me again if I had or wanted to go through insurance. And I said to him, I didn't think it was going to get approved, that I had looked into it, that I didn't have the best insurance to have this done. And so he set me up with his team at the front. I mean, it was a very short consultation. I would say I was out of there within 30 minutes. He took photos, he looked at them, whatnot. And it's not something to feel uncomfortable about. I mean, there's other people in the room. There's a nurse who's there. You're not having blood work done. I think I had my weight checked, but aside from that, I also would say I want to think that there was maybe something that he had, like scale-wise almost, from what I remember, that allowed him to, I think, check exactly how much he was going to be able to take off of each of my breasts. I think he had also suggested at that point in that initial consultation, I did the bilateral surgery and not just the breast reduction because mine were so low. And he also said that I think either the left or the right breast was bigger, and so that one was going to have more essentially fat taken out. And if you're like me and you have body image issues or had any form of an eating disorder, those words fat and getting on the scale and all of these things, I mean, they're a bit triggering. Even at the time they were triggering, and to talk about it now, I remember being really nervous. But I was so set on this goal of being in a body I felt comfortable with that I really didn't like care too much. But I do remember feeling a bit, cautious about it as I was going through the process. So then he set me up with his front staff people, and I think they told me that they required a $2,500 deposit up front, and then the rest of the payment, which was I think that remaining $9,700, to be fulfilled within either 3 months before the surgery. They had dates very early on for me to go, but like I just said, I decided to do this over the holidays because I was very religious about knowing when I was going to be able to go back to work. And so I knew that over December, my whole industry shuts down. I was like very deep in entertainment at the time. This is pre-Disney. And so I just knew that the fashion and entertainment industry gets super slow then. And I'm so glad I made that decision. So my first step, because I didn't have the money, was I took out a loan through my mom's credit union. She co-signed that loan, but it was under my name, so I paid it off. There was a monthly installment, and then that $2,500 deposit. I remember thinking back like, oh my God, this better be the best decision I ever make because it's a lot of money. And now it's been years. But, things like that, there was no amount of money you can put on your confidence or your happiness. And so it was just the best decision I made. But we did that, and then the surgery date was set. Up into the surgery, I did a lot of research. The doctor was his staff were super helpful to me. I would call a lot of the times and ask, what do I need? There's certain bras, there's a whole protocol behind the surgery. I got really anxious up until the days leading before the surgery. I spent a lot of time on Real Self looking at the reviews. If you decide to go and get this surgery done and you look up the reviews, I urge you to really make sure that the reviews are aligned with what you think. I mean, that app in particular was great. There's other apps and websites, of course, but I didn't find one bad review about Dr. Lee. And so not only was the referral from my uncle helpful, but the fact that there wasn't one bad review out there, I felt very safe with my decision to do this with him. And so up until the surgery, I waited, I think, about 4 or 5 months. And so they tell you there's certain bras you have to have and what the recovery period is like. Now, fast forward to 24 hours before the surgery, you're not allowed to eat or drink anything. Because this surgery was in Massachusetts, my mom, my dad, and my now ex-boyfriend from high school got up around, I want to say, 4 o'clock in the morning. We had a whole bag packed for me. I hadn't eaten or drank anything, and we drove down to where the surgery was. My original doctor's offices were in Boston, which is where I did the first consultation with him. But then the actual surgery was done at his surgery center in Needham. And so we went there. I mean, I remember it so clearly. It's just an operating room, and you fill out a form. I want to say the surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m., and we got there on the dot at 6. I really don't think you're allowed to be late for the surgery in any capacity. And the funny thing is, the doctors, I can be a bit of a hypochondriac when it comes to health things. I always think I'm going to die. I don't know if it's the half Jewish in me because my dad's like this and he's Jewish. That's what I've heard. But I always think I'm going to die. So I asked the doctor many times, how many surgeries of these have you done? How many do you do in a day? And he was very helpful with reminding me. He does about, I think, 3 to 4 surgeries, breast reductions in a day, which is crazy. And so it was almost like back to back. You as the patient, of course, are sitting there thinking that this is your whole world at this moment. But this doctor is like in and out faster than you can go across the street, essentially. But it wasn't, I mean, it was a 4-hour surgery. So I filled out the intake form. I went into the waiting room, and then Dr. Lee, came in. He was very nice, super cordial. I hadn't seen him since that first meeting where he had all the photos and everything. We had a very short conversation. My parents were in the room, and then they put me to sleep. And I was super nervous. I remember the last thing I probably said was, am I going to die? And then I woke up. And I do remember waking up. Obviously, you're in such a fog. Your whole upper body is completely bandaged and taped up. Now, that surgery takes about 6 hours. So to explain what they do is they remove both of your nipples. So because of that, there's a strong possibility you can't breastfeed. As I've gotten older, it definitely goes through my mind if I decide to have kids that did I make the right decision? Would I have preferred to be able to breastfeed or whatnot? I don't really think I would have made a different decision. However, it is a reason I was told that a lot of women decide to not get the surgery is because they may not be able to breastfeed. When you're 18, 19, I mean, you're really not thinking about it. But sure, now at 26, I do think, I'll find out one day if I have kids, but I didn't think about it as much at the time. But they remove your nipples and then they remove the fat from your breasts. And then they essentially do a traditional breast lift and put your nipples back on. And the scar that I had, I think there's 2 or 3 different types of ways that you can have a breast reduction. I had an anchor scar. So the scars on my boobs go around where the nipple is, and then it's an anchor down and around. Now, I made a huge error and didn't really follow the aftercare instructions. So I did not do what the doctor suggested with massaging the scars. Massaging the scars would have been a really ideal situation because I would have probably had less scarring. I don't find at this point that I have heavy scarring. However, if I had followed those instructions, I think I would have had even less. The reason I didn't is because I was super uncomfortable with touching them. It freaked me out when the bandages came off, but I'll get to that in a second. So I remember waking up and then I remember you don't feel anything. I mean, you were on the most amount of drugs. So I remember getting into the car. You can't lay on your chest, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks. So I had to sit upright for about 2 weeks, literally like this, in a chair to sleep every night. I remember looking at my phone in the car, like taking it out of the glove compartment, looking at my phone, and just it was all like blurry. And then I just passed out. I don't really remember walking into the house. I don't remember any of that. It's not like the funny videos you see from getting your wisdom teeth. You're just completely knocked out. I mean, it's a very intense procedure, and you never see the doctor again. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 follow-up phone calls and the 1 follow-up meeting with him to get the bandages removed. But again, it's super brief. Like, the best doctors are the ones that are there to do their job. They don't spend that much time because obviously they're so used to doing this surgery. And so I sat upright like this in a chair for, I want to say 2 weeks over Christmas. I was not allowed to go up to my bedroom and sleep. My mom had a chair that reclined in the living room that I slept on. And it took me about a week to recover. You have these bandages on you and you can't get them wet. So we had to be really careful with, I remember my showering or like if any water touched them. And then I want to say exactly a week after the surgery is when I went back down to Massachusetts and I got the bandages off. I will never forget looking at my new breasts and just being like, oh my God. I mean, your body heals so well, which is remarkable, especially if you're young and you're in good health. So if you are between 16 and 20, this is the prime time to get it done, I guarantee you. And it was just the most incredible moment for me. But prior to that, it was very hard for me to walk. I remember like it was very light walking and stuff. They said the recovery time was closer to 4 weeks. I didn't actually experience that. I remember within that next week, I was up and about. I was at the mall doing some light Christmas shopping. You can't do any heavy lifting, so I couldn't really pick things up properly. So that did affect my workouts. I wasn't able to run for 4 months. And as someone who at the time was very much struggling with my body image and my weight mentally, it was a difficult thing for me. I think the most difficult thing for me was to become comfortable with not working out. I was able to do light walking on the treadmill. That's all. Like I couldn't even be on the Stairmaster. And so I maintained that routine because I didn't want to affect anything. The thing is, you're really stitched up. The stitches are very much there and they dissolve on their own, but you don't want to go screwing around with that. That will completely affect the whole process. And so there was that consultation and then the bandages came off. And then within maybe, I think 4 to 6 weeks, I went with my mom to Victoria's Secret, and that was the most like wholesome moment for me and I remember I took a picture, and of course you have scars and stuff, but it's not as bad as you think. The scarring, they do disappear pretty fast in terms of the stitches. So you are just left with whatever scar you have. For me, it was the anchor. For you, maybe something different. And they are intense scars at the beginning. It was a deep purple scar, but again, like you don't really notice it too much. You do have to, if you lift up, right, any of your breast. Underneath is where that scar is. So the scar that's around your nipple you can see, but really that like dark purple line is under the bottom of it. It's not on the top of it. It was really not noticeable too much. But looking in the mirror after having years of struggling with that body image and having these massive breasts, to just see myself look finally like the person I wanted to become was awesome. I was able to buy a bra at 34C. I wore the surgery bras for months. So this was like my first bra to be able to buy as an adult now with this size on. And it was just great. And to this day, I have no doubts, no complaints about getting it done. The only thing I wish I had done was those aftercare instructions. Like I said, I was given a cocoa butter, I think, actually, to massage into the scars. But if you've ever felt a scar before, even if you've ever felt like the top of a tattoo you just got done, it's like a bit bumpy, it's a bit hard. Think of doing that on like such a tender part of your body. It's really freaky. And it even now, I mean, I can touch them and I feel the scars there. But the original early days of the surgery, the scars felt a lot more to me, and it just freaked me out. I don't know. I couldn't do it, and I still don't do it, and I should have done it. But again, the scarring that I have seen years after getting the surgery is nothing in comparison to what I was expecting. Perhaps it's my skin color. I'm not sure why, but I was very lucky on that. And to this day, if I wear a bikini, you can see certain tiny, tiny scars right under the bikini line, but like, I've never had a guy, I can tell you, like, I have never had a guy say, wow, did you get a surgery on your boobs? Never. Like, literally never. And I think that's what a lot of people wonder is, like, are people going to be able to tell? Sure, those early months you can tell, but following that, after your first year, your second year, they just fade. The scars fade away. That's what they're meant to do. And sure, it looks like there's a bit something there, and I know when I look at them, but it's not something that you'll notice at all. So I hope this helps those of you who are thinking, I hope this helps those of you who are thinking about confidence and this particular surgery and potentially getting it. Like I said, it was the best decision that I ever made. I have no regrets. Even financially, taking out a loan at the time made a lot of sense for me. And I think if there is a will, there is a way. I definitely believe in doing things like this that make you feel like a more confident version of yourself. But I am not a fan of doing it on the spur of the moment with any surgery like that, even tattoos that I've gotten. These are things I have thought about that I've been wanting to do. The breast reduction I had been thinking about for close to a year, and that's when I decided to take the plunge. And your friends and family, they should support you. I mean, this is a cosmetic procedure, but it's based on something that affects your overall well-being, your health, your back. And so, of course, if people don't support you, then that's on them. But as long as you find the right doctor, if you want Dr. Lee's contact information, please reach out to me. I'll even see if I can put it in the show notes. He was just the best doctor. He was the best doctor. I'm so glad that my uncle told me to reach out to him, and I trusted him every minute of the way. I was able to call the doctor and the nurse after hours if I needed to. There was just not one moment where I questioned my safety or my health. This is so different than those crazy whack procedures you'll see with like Brazilian butt lifts or botched boob jobs. This is so different than that. But finding the right doctor and investing in the amount of money that it cost is a huge decision. And so you want to make sure that it's the right thing for you. So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Dare to Be Fearless. Head to the show notes if you want to connect on social media and find out more about the show. And I will see you next week for a new episode of Dare to Be Fearless.